911, what are you reporting?
I got a strange going on out here. Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree. I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
Damn it, I'm really confused. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence, and he was dead when she hit the ground. I didn't see any cars. All I saw was my dog coming over the fence.
What are you reporting?
We got someone or something crawling around out here.
Did you see what it was?
It was standing up. I'm out here looking through the window now and I don't see anything. I don't want to go outside. Jesus Christ, you better...
Sure.
See ya!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
All right, folks, I want to welcome our guest to the show. It is Ash from Oklahoma. Welcome to the show, man.
Hey, thanks, Brian. Great to be here.
Absolutely. So let's get right into it. Let's talk about this Bigfoot thing. Let's start with what got you interested in the subject to begin with. Was it something that was always on your radar, or did it happen after you had some sort of experience?
Like everybody else, I saw all this stuff back in the day with, Leonard Nimoy and the Boggy Creek and stuff. And for me, I just never really gave it much credence. Till about 10 years ago, my uncle said, "Hey man, I got some pictures I want to show you from the place." And this is, my family owns like 4 sections that this road goes in between and dead ends at, and it's right on Boggy itself. So it's kind of apropos. And I'd never, everything that had ever weird that I'd seen there was all, UFO alien stuff, not Bigfoot at all. And I said, "All right, man, yeah, show them to me." And he had very clear trail cam pictures of like what else it could possibly be. I don't know. It's like 100% what everybody describes as Bigfoot. So I said,
go ahead.
Where'd you get him? And he told me that he had, he hunts, always has. He's a superb outdoorsman. And he said, I was finding these deer that were literally ripped apart, not skinned, but like something held onto the front legs and ripped the head and spine completely off down the body of it. And just like left the quarters there, but all the guts and stuff were gone. And I was like, that's completely freaking weird. What does that? And he's like, I don't know. So I put out all these trail cams to try to see what was roaming around down there. And there were these pictures of Bigfoot and shafts of light coming straight down out of the sky with nothing attached to them. Just like you could see the top of the shaft of light, column of light into the ground. You would see deer looking at the shafts of light. Like, where is that coming from? And I was like, I have no idea, man. I have no idea. And,
do you have any idea why he chose that moment in time to share those with you? Did he think
I think because I'm a scientist. I'm trained. I've always been a science nerd since I was a little kid, super precocious. He's like my favorite uncle. He and I have a great relationship. We're both vets. We talk about the wars, and you can't really talk to other people who don't have any background in it. And so he and I've just always been really close, and he knows that I'm really open-minded about things, that I'm not dogmatic about science. I look at fact and data and follow it where it goes. You don't have a preconceived notion of what you're unless you're cherry picking your data, you don't get to decide where it's going. And I think that was at that point, he had pretty much just been like, this is what this is. I need somebody else to look at this and tell me if I'm crazy and drawing the right conclusions. And so, because by that point he had seen them, he and my aunt both had seen them outside, eye shine outside their windows at night. They have a patio that's like off their, it's kind of on the hill over the river bottom. It's on stilts off the side of the house. So they're up off the ground 12, 15 feet, seeing eye shine that's like level with the bottom of the deck. Various height individuals, like 4, probably 2 adults and 2 juveniles at that point, had heard them calling back and forth to each other across the river valley, having animals come up missing, just all that kind of fun stuff. And like, this is weird. What do you think this is? And I'm like, man, I can't reach a different conclusion than you. That's the only thing I can think that is.
So other than the light that you described already, can you sort of describe for me and the audience what types of pictures you were seeing? What were you seeing in the pictures, the physical description of what was in the photos?
Oh, okay. So, yeah, there would be, you would see, in one of them, there were 3 deer, kind of standing there eating. Next picture, one of them has heard something behind it and has turned to see what it is. And you can see, eye shine in the background, kind of in the tree line, that you can't tell what it is yet. And then in the next picture, that deer is looking like it's about to run, and there is a large, probably judging from the tree branches in that spot, about 7.5 foot tall, bipedal, hairy creature that probably is pushing every bit of 750, 800 pounds, approaching the deer that are there minding their own business up to that point anyway. So, and then there were other ones where there were daylight shots of a tree line with bushes, something standing kind of hanging out halfway between a tree, where you could see its left shoulder and arm and hip and leg and part of its head. Not the crown of its head, but like part of its face. You could tell that it kind of had a peaked skull, but not how dramatic. You could tell that it wasn't rounded like ours. And there've been, probably 3 or 4 other ones that are really close to the camera, so you can't really tell what it is, but you can tell that it's a hairy, dark colored shoulder with an arm, things like that are partial pics, but you can see muscle definition in the arm where you're like, that's not some guy in a costume. In fact, I know a guy who lives probably 5 miles from my parents who tried to make a Bigfoot costume, and he is a very large individual. Everybody he tried to spoof could totally tell it was a guy in a costume. Didn't fool anybody. And he's big enough to play the part. So yeah, anybody who's capable of making things like that should be in Hollywood making millions of dollars doing special effects, because suffice it to say, there's not a large pool of individuals in southeastern Oklahoma who can do that.
Yeah, and it seems to be the common thread, because every time I've ever seen any type of a video, whether it's supposed to be somebody trying to hoax something or just saying, I don't know what this is, or whatever the case may be, if it's a person in a costume, almost without fail, and I'm not a trained Bigfoot anything, honestly. I'm a trained observer from my years in law enforcement, obviously, but immediately your brain automatically goes to, that is a dude in a suit. It just is, right? Or it just, something sticks out. It just isn't quite right. There's something off about it. Todd Standing videos. you just know, right?
Right.
But when you have those moments where you have the Patterson Gimlin film comes to mind, it could be, it couldn't be, but it just doesn't look like a suit. So I guess
Right.
the other question I wanted to sort of paint the picture for the audience. I know you said they got several tracts of land, family land. Where was this in relation to everything else? Was this a really remote area? Was it just on the cusp of where the house is? Can you sort of give us a description of where this might be as far as where the trail cam pictures were coming from?
So where that house is, the houses that sit on it, there's maybe in that 4 sections, there's about 8 houses. They sit on about 160 acres each. The ones on that side of the road, because it cuts in, and then when it gets to the corner of the section, it cuts down and dead ends at my great uncle's place. All of those houses on that side sit up on the hill, dropping down into the river bottom. So the trail cameras that he set are probably, the closest one's probably 200-300 yards from the house. But in relation to these other houses, I mean, they're all like a quarter of a mile apart. Where this is in relation to the nearest town it's out there, man. You left a paved road like 12 miles ago. And that paved road was just a cut through between a highway and a county road that's miles away. Like, it's not going anywhere. It's just a cut through for people in that back part of the county that live down there in between the mountains and the river. That's how they get places. There's not really a highway. There's like 3 major highways in the county. Like this, there's so few people in this county. It's one of the biggest counties in the state. It didn't have a second phone prefix until about 15 years ago. There's very few people there. So it's kind of BFE. Like, it's, if you look on a dark sky map of the United States, like it's one of the darkest places in the country.
Gotcha. So you get to see this trail cam pictures of this creature, and your uncle's telling you about his and his aunt's encounters. Did they have other encounters, or was it just the eye shine and things that they were seeing with these things messing around the house?
My aunt said that she would be in the kitchen, and God help her. She wants no one to know that they're there. She wants them left alone, to the extent that their representative in the state legislature introduced a bill to put a bounty on Bigfoot for hunting purposes in Oklahoma. And they immediately destroyed all the physical evidence they had collected, so that no one can ever figure out where it is. But she's been feeding them for years. All of the, she's a Southern woman. She cooks like crazy, makes way more food than anyone needs. She just takes all the rest of it outside and sticks it by the fence. So when they can smell her cooking, they're standing outside the window, just watching her from the trees. My uncle told me the other day that he had gotten a bunch of chickens, and because he had a bunch of rabbits, they all disappeared out of cages that were locked with latches. Something opened them, didn't tear them apart, opened the cages, took the rabbits, they're gone. So he got a bunch of chickens, and he let the roosters run around at night, and they would roost in a tree that's right. I mean, it's right out by the driveway. All these roosters just gone. Didn't hear any clucking, didn't find a single feather. There was one small bantam rooster that was left, and he said that thing was terrified, hiding under a shed that would not come out for the longest time. And when it did, it ran right into the hen coop. Wouldn't come out. So, if it's a cat, and there's mountain lions and bobcats down there, you could say, well, it was a cat. But if you've ever seen where a cat took a turkey, there's feathers everywhere. So like how something got 5 leghorn roosters without leaving a feather off of a tree, other than something that can just walk up on them and I don't know. I don't know what it is. But they've when he told me, it's probably been 3 or 4 years ago, it flooded real bad. And when the river gets all the way up, it will come all the way up to the fence on their yard. And there's a pond right across it. It's on the side of the hill, dropping down into this meadow where there's usually cows. And it was probably 2 o'clock in the morning, and it had finally stopped raining and storming. And he heard one yell out across the valley, and then said about 15 minutes later, he said he laid there waiting to hear if another one called back, and he never did hear anything. But about 15 minutes later, he heard bipedal slop, like, and this water at that fence line is probably 2.5, 3 feet deep. Like you would hear someone stomping through a mud puddle is what it sounded like, coming all the way down that fence line and up the hill. So, I mean, my legs aren't long enough to do that, and I'm 6 feet tall. I don't know anybody who's tall enough to do that. And I know some 7-foot guys that, like, I don't know. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah. I always get concerned when, and I certainly get, these things are on the property. Your aunt's reaction is, I don't want anybody hurting them. I don't want anybody knowing about them. I certainly get that, but I really get concerned when I hear people are feeding them. And I've had several people on the show, and I've talked to people off the air that have sort of this symbiotic relationship where they're taking these things food. And people I've talked to in the past, I think Dave comes to mind from early on, way back when the show first started, was feeding these things, and then they get pissed off when the feeding stops, right?
Yeah. And that's what I told her.
Yeah, they start taking animals. They were taking, like 20, 30 pounds of dog food at a time out of his dog food containers outside for his dogs.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it gets to be this expensive venture, and it can also be a little bit dangerous. So you had this conversation with your uncle. You got to see these photos. They're sharing their encounter stories. What was the conversation like between you and them? Were you telling them some of these things? I mean, where did the conversation go?
Yeah. I said, this was before your podcast had even started. And I said, it's probably not a good idea to feed something that's a wild animal, because if these things are what you think they are, we don't know anything about their behavior. And she's all sweet church lady, and she's all, well, they haven't hurt anybody yet, and they're just so nice, and they're never scary and or anything like that. I'm like, did you see what happened to the deer down there that got ripped to pieces? Like, anything that's strong enough to do that doesn't need you to feed it, for one. Two, you feeding it is going to keep it around when it probably shouldn't be. Like, you're supposed to take down hummingbird feeders when it gets cold, so they'll leave and go where they're supposed to go and don't suffer in the winter. If they stick around and say you guys go on vacation, what's to say that thing's not going to tear your house apart to get food out of it? She said, well, that hasn't happened, and I don't think they do that. I'm like, well, you can think that all you want to, but that sounds like a gamble to me. So
did they ever give you any indication that maybe some of the other folks in the area were having activity, or do you think it's just isolated to their property, or do they know of some of the other neighbors that they might have shared information with that had the same thing going on?
Well, a lot of the people in the area, there's, that county's got 5 or 6 families that are all relatively related to each other. A woman 10 miles down the river is my uncle's first cousin. I guess she's my third cousin or something. She saw one when she was out back hanging up her laundry several years ago, and it scared her so bad she had a heart attack. They had to take her to the hospital. The other day when I was talking to him, he told me that, because I had asked him, who else up and down through here is seeing these things, because they're not staying there year round. Like, they're moving. And he said that there were 3 or 4 people talking at his church the Sunday before about seeing stuff. And one of the guys that I grew up with, his son bought a piece of land on the other side of the river from him. It's probably 2 miles from there. And his oldest son was out squirrel hunting and saw one straight up in broad daylight that yelled at him, scared him so bad he won't go back in the woods anymore. So it's not just them. There's other people seeing them. So,
and I really hate to hear that they destroyed the trail cam evidence. Again,
Yeah.
I sort of
Yeah.
get where you're coming from, but it just, my heart sinks when I hear that, because I talked to people like Cliff Brackman recently, and I had Nico on, and I was talking about some of the trail cam stuff that they've seen that is just phenomenal footage, videos and pictures of these things that will never be seen.
Yeah.
And it just tears me up, because I think there is a lot of that. I've said it on the show plenty of times. I think there's a lot of people out there that have things that we will never be privy to that could almost overnight, again, videos and pictures are always going to be subjective, obviously, and considered to be anecdotal evidence, even though it's a physical thing that can be analyzed. But we're still talking about the Patterson-Gimlin film since '67, right? And some people say it's real, some people don't. But I think if we had more of, people coming forward, and even if it's anonymously, at least allowing some of that stuff to be seen, I think we would be a little bit further, in my opinion, down the road with people accepting, including me, because I'm still very skeptical. I haven't seen one of these things, right?
Right.
And if I see some compelling video and audio and have compelling interviews with eyewitness people who have actually seen these things, it does take you a little bit further down the road. Do you think they would ever be willing to maybe put up trail cams again and maybe anonymously share some of the photos that they get, or do you think that's just a road?
I don't know. I asked him about that the other day, because I was like you when he told me that. My heart just sank, because when I approached this subject just as a little nerd kid trying to figure it out, I was like, well, if there's something there's got to be evidence. But the older I've gotten and the more you hear things like this, and you got judges and lawyers and cops and state troopers seeing these things, forestry workers, National Park Service seeing these things on a regular basis. It's just a matter of time before it's going to be a recognized species, and all of this lost data is going to matter. It's setting the science back probably 30 or 40 years. If there wasn't the stigma, I mean, I'm on here with my face obscured, for crying out loud. If it weren't for the stigma, I think a lot of people would be perfectly willing to come forward. But then you've got ones like them who just want them to be left alone. They think they've been there for tens of thousands of years, minding their own business. Everything's fine. They don't need anything from us. Just leave them alone. Everybody can forget about them and they'll be better off. But at the same time, if a large predatory species loses its habitat because it's not protected, that's going to create long-term fallout that diminishes the species, perhaps beyond the point of return. So those things matter, I think. And I mean, I don't know that I convinced him otherwise the other day when I talked to him, but
yeah,
I don't know that it's a closed book. I think if it were just him, I think my aunt is more down that road than he is. But they probably got a good 20 years left on them. So I don't know that that's going to change. They might. And if they were a recognized species and people were leaving them alone, maybe she'd change her mind about it. But I don't know.
Well, I certainly get that they don't want, the Bigfoot researchers. They don't want Expedition Bigfoot rolling up with a camera crew on their property to do investigations, things like that. But I think there is a way, you know, to maybe convince them to allow some trail cam pictures to be released or video to be released that in a way, if it's explained properly, like similar to what you just said, maybe they would understand that it is a way, in my opinion, that you could help preserve these things down the road, because we don't know anything about if they exist at all. We don't know anything about how many of them there are, what the habitat is, if they are migrating, if they're sticking to a 1 or 2 mile or maybe even a 10-mile radius or whatever the case may be. And those
Right.
kind of things are important. They could be one of the most single-handedly, they could change what we know about these things, because if they're catching the same ones year after year on trail cams, for example,
Yeah.
moving through a certain bottom or certain areas, there's all kinds of data that can be extrapolated from just a few trail cam pictures on their property. So, you know, I get it. It's their property. It's their, it's their life. It's
Right.
their Sasquatches in a way. So I certainly get it, but I wish I could just have a conversation with them and say, look, there's so much that can be gleaned from what you guys have, because if they're having those experiences, and I certainly believe you, and I believe that they are, it could go a long way in helping us understand what we're dealing with. But it is what it is. I get that people are private people, and I'm the same way about my property. I wouldn't
Yeah.
want a bunch of people out and doing things, and I do some of that stuff on my own, and I've wrestled with the fact, if people have asked me all the time, if you see one of these things on your property, are you going to tell anybody? I don't know. I don't. There's some
Right.
stigma with
Right.
there's some stigma with being the Bigfoot podcast guy who eventually catches one on video or catches one on a trail cam or sees one in the flesh. I've said it recently. I would probably, me being the person that I am, I'm going to come out and tell people whatever my experience is, because that's kind of the business I'm in, and I'm not a
Right.
hypocrite. So I would eventually do that, but I would certainly make some phone calls, and I would have some conversations with people, and I would certainly have my ducks in a row before I ever came out and presented anything as definitive evidence that
Yeah.
I've seen one or captured one on camera. So I certainly understand it. You mentioned it earlier, and I don't know if there's any more Sasquatch stuff we need to cover before we get there. And if there is, certainly do that. But you mentioned in your email, and you alluded to earlier in the beginning of the interview, that's not the only strange thing that's going on out there. So would you mind going into some of the other things that you've experienced yourself personally and tell us a little bit about that?
No, not at all. Yeah, because like I said, this aspect of what the weird stuff that's gone on there was relatively new. I lived there. Um, my family's owned it for generations. My parents' piece was right next to where this is going on, even further up the hill. When I wasn't quite 5, but almost 5. My dad worked away from home. His company was on the other side of the state, and he would be off working during the week. On Friday nights, my brother and I got to stay up until he got home. And that house is really large. It was, my grandparents. They had 5 kids who were, spread out. So it was massive, but we only used like the front half of it. And my brother and I, because we were so small, we shared a room, and it was on the corner of the house. So we had big bay windows on one wall above one bed, and big bay windows on the other wall over the other bed. And we, just being kids, we would mess around. My mom was out watching Johnny Carson, and we're back there in the bedroom, and the beds were kind of catty corner to each other, where they're like the edges of the bed made a square in the corner of the room, and we would just bounce back and forth between them and pass each other in the air like crazy kids. We're lucky we didn't kill ourselves. These were big oak framed beds and bay windows right there. If we ever did anything wrong, we'd have probably cut ourselves to ribbons or concussed ourselves severely, but that never happened. But we were doing that, and I saw a shadow as I was bouncing through the air. I saw a shadow of someone hunched over, creeping along the side of the house. And I snagged my brother, pulled him down, and I whispered to him that our uncle was going to try to scare us, because he used to do pranks on us all the time. I mean, he lived right over there, and he was always messing with us. And so I said, we're gonna jump up and we're gonna scare him. And he said, okay, this will be fun. And when we came back to the other side, instead of dropping down, we popped up in the window and ah! And it was not my uncle. It was probably 5'2", 5'3", olive gray, reptilian looking creature that had 3 fingers and a thumb. It didn't have what you would call like a pinky, that was a noticeably shorter finger. It had flat teeth. Its ears were kind of closer to its head than ours, more integrated, I would say. It had vertical pupil slits. And I say it had flat teeth because when we jumped up to scare it, we did totally surprise it. Its mouth literally fell open and it went, ah. But it wasn't human by any stretch of the imagination. It scared us out of our minds. We screamed and dropped down. And my brother said, what do we do? And I said, you hide. And I jumped back up. And at that point, it was already running towards the front porch from the window. It wasn't even trying to sneak anymore. It was just straight up running. And I ran down the hall into the living room where my mom was sitting completely catatonic on a couch, staring directly ahead at the TV, just like she was frozen. The TV was nothing but static. And I'm yelling at her that there's a demon outside, with like no response at all, because we're little kids. Like the notion of UFOs and aliens and stuff didn't even register. You know, we're just kids raised in the church. That was like our frame of reference. There's the demon. And so I locked the front door because, you know, out there, nobody, even to this day, most people don't lock their doors, much less, you know, in 1980 is anybody locking a door, especially if you expect people to be there. So I can hear it at that point. It's running up the steps. I can hear it when I lock the door. And since she's not responding, I just cut tracks to the back of the house because I'm thinking, oh, there's other doors. Like the garage door's unlocked. There's the back door that's a big sliding glass thing with a deck out back that, you know, comes into this big family room back there. And so I go to run to lock those, and there's already 2 starting. One's on the grass coming towards the steps, and one is already probably 1 foot on the bottom step and one on the second coming up that. And so I just, you know, that sliding glass doors used to have that bar, you know, that would go down and lock it from being able to be open. And I hit that about the same time the thing was making the top of the deck. And it was visibly angry at that fact and was banging on the glass with its hands. It didn't, if it was, I mean, it was probably as physically strong as a small child, because it wasn't, unless it was just, you know, just trying to be distracting or whatever. It wasn't hitting it hard enough to break the glass. So, but then it stopped and just kind of got this smirk on its face. Stopped, looking angry, and looked amused. And I heard the garage door handle start to turn, which is like right across this room. And so I just bolted straight for it. It started to open when I was probably 5 or 6 feet away from it, which at that age is, you know, a couple of steps. So I just dropped my shoulder and slammed full on into it and threw the bolt on it. right as it closed. And I heard whatever was opening the door bounce off the hood of my mom's car, because there were steps up in from the garage into that part of the house, and I heard it make an audible when it hit. And I'm freaked completely out at this point. It's a good thing it happened when I was that young, because my heart would probably explode if that happened now. I never had an adrenaline spike like that, even in combat conditions. Like, that is hands down the scariest thing I've ever experienced in my life. Jumping out of airplanes, not even close. Because it's so, like, at this point, and I was a very precocious child. I read encyclopedias for fun when I was like 3 years old. This did not register as something that was supposed to exist in reality on this planet at all. Every authoritative source said, no, that doesn't exist. That's not real. That's fake. Even the concept of demons was like, well, that's religious. It's quasi-scientific thing over here. That's old stuff. That doesn't even happen anymore. But there you are in it, and it's pretty scary. And I could hear that one kind of getting off of the car, but I could hear another one already running on the floor of the garage. So I don't know if there were those two in the back, and the one that had run up on the front porch might have been one of the two that was in the garage. So I can't say that there were more than four, but yeah, it was freaking crazy. And I'm just like, I don't even know what I'm going to do at this point, but I feel like I have the place secure, and I can hear my dad's work truck, which was this, 1-ton flatbed welder on the back truck that you can hear coming. It's diesel. You can hear that thing coming out there from 2 miles away. I hear it coming down the road, and I'm like, yay, we're going to be safe. And because he was in Vietnam, he's a pretty scary guy. So, being a little kid, I'm like, Superman's coming. Everything's going to be all right. And I can hear them start to run out of the garage, and I can hear the ones running off the deck in the back. And so I'm like, okay, I'm just going to go back out there. And when I go into the living room, it's still staticky. My mom's starting to snap out of whatever catatonic state she's in. Johnny Carson then comes back on right as my dad's truck is pulling into the driveway. And they're gone. And that was the only time that I've experienced anything scary like that. But I don't know, I was probably 14 or 15. And I noticed that at the right side base of my skull, probably an inch below the base of my skull and 2 inches off of center line of my spine, there is a distinct lump that is there that changes size depending upon how much stress I'm under. And most of my family's in the medical field. And, I was supposed to be a surgeon myself before I decided I didn't want to do that lifestyle of dealing with insurance companies and all that fun. But I asked my mom about it, and she literally said, maybe the aliens put it there. And I said, you're not funny. Seriously, what is that? And she goes, I'm not joking. Maybe the aliens put it there. So obviously I had to be like, well, why would you say that? And she told me a story about how when she was pregnant with me, she and her cousin and my aunt had gone to watch a movie in town. And when they were coming back, they noticed that there was a light following them at tree height. When they'd slow down, it'd slow down. When they'd speed up, it'd speed up. And again, this is out in the middle of nowhere. This is not on a flight path of any planes anywhere. This thing wasn't making any sound. It scared the crap out of them. And so they got to this straightaway before you make the turn down to the family's road, and they started hauling butt, and it just got closer and closer to them. And that was the last thing they remembered until, turns out, 2 or 3 hours later, they're on the road in the truck going home, and everybody's been out looking for them, wanting to know where they had gone missing to. Which, you know, how do you not find a vehicle that's right there? Like, where did they go? Not a clue. Not a clue. So apparently, that has been going on for quite some time. And I've seen other craft up close 3 or 4 different times. And it's always with someone else. It's not just when I'm with myself and I see something. There's always another person there. So I can't even write it off as I saw something and thought it was one thing and I was just tired and playing tricks on myself or whatever. In fact, this still goes on. The other day, the space station flew over, went outside to watch it. Wife came out to watch it. It had passed down to where it was, at that point, it was out over by Alabama, by the Gulf Coast. And coming from the path that it was on, there was a smaller light coming back the opposite direction, and it just zigzagged in flashes of motion so fast it just looked like it was coming this way, stopped, went around the moon, stopped again, started on a completely different path that took it right over the top of us, and then it stopped right after it got north of us and made this really bright flash and was just gone. No idea what that thing was. None. My wife was like, what in the world was that? It's like, I have no idea. If we've got that, we're not talking about it. I don't even know why we would have that. She said, I feel like it was almost talking to us because it stopped right over us and did that flash. And I'm like, I don't know what else to say. I don't know what that is.
So I want to go back. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah. So like another time, this was a couple years ago, my brother and I were up by the Uinta Basin in camping in January in the mountains, like crazy people. And we had cooked dinner and eaten. We're sitting outside the tent by fire. And this place is kind of if you come into the Colorado side off of the Uinta Basin, there's like a range of mountains that runs north and south. And where the Green River Valley is, there's mountains that run on either side of it. So you're kind of in this box canyon that runs, it's got 11,000 foot mountains all the way around it, except for to the east. And that runs for about 50 miles. And then you're up by Steamboat, Colorado. And there's rabbit ears 14,000 feet high up there. So you can hear planes coming before you can even see them. And this light, and if you've seen these things, the lights on them are not like anything we've got. The closest thing we've got now are LEDs, but these things are like some kind of, I don't even know how they do it. It's almost like an ionized piece of air, almost like an arc from a welding torch. Almost has that same vibrancy to it. but it's, you know, these things were like the size of a baseball, and it, you know, visually at that distance, it's coming up over the mountain. There's one, it's not making any sound. My brother's like, "What is that, man?" I'm like, "I don't know. It's not a helicopter. It's not a plane. It's not moving fast enough to be a plane." And then as it started, and I mean, it's coming from south to north, it got to where there was probably 10 seconds of arc. And then another one came right behind it. Another 15 seconds of arc or so. Another one right behind that. There were as many as 4 of them that you could see at one time. And when they got directly above us, that one in the front would just wink out of existence. And then they would just keep coming like a train, that the front one just disappeared right in front of us. And my brother's freaking out. He'd never seen anything like that. He's my baby brother. He's like 10 years younger than us. He was not even a thought on the radar when that other stuff happened. And he's like, "What is that, man?" I'm like, "What do you think it is?" He's like, "I don't know what it is. What is that?" I'm like, "Well, I don't know what to tell you other than we don't really have anything like that. You know, I had security clearances. I ran a radar unit. We didn't have stuff like that. Maybe we got some since I was in. I don't know." And he's like, "No, dude. What? No, seriously. What is that?" I'm like, "Your guess is as good as mine, man. I don't know what that is." He's like, "It's not even making sound." I'm like, "Nope, it's not." So how do those lights even, I've never seen lights like that. I'm like, "Me either. I don't know what those are." Like, we're awfully close to Skinwalker Ranch though. So, you know, all kinds of weird stuff happens out there. Maybe it's some of that stuff. I don't know. But yeah, some crazy crap like that, I see probably every 2 years, 4 years over the course of my life. It's crazy. It's like they follow me around or something. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Because since that first event, I have no memory of where that thing in my neck came from. I had that for 20 years, never moved, never changed. I woke up one night feeling like I had been just beaten and drugged through the ringer and had another one on the other side. And for 3 days after that, I had vertigo, was throwing up constantly, couldn't stand up, was all kinds of messed up. And I'm the guy you can put on the worst roller coaster in the world. And I'm like, "Yay, this is so fun." Never had vertigo in my life. Then I woke up, had a third one that was maybe an inch down and to the left from the new one. That's fine. Felt like $100. Not a problem in the world. Didn't even feel like I'd ever been sick. There was no like recovery time. It was literally, I was throwing up my toenails and dizzy, worse than I've ever been, as drunk as I've ever been in my life, to being asleep for 3 hours and waking up feeling like I had company, got another thing in my neck, and I'm fine. It's bizarre. It's bizarre. I don't know any other way to put it. It's just crazy.
So I want to go back to go ahead.
Sorry. And that was the impetus for me getting in touch with you in the first place, because when my uncle called me the other day, he told me that he just asked me about, because I've not told this to anybody outside the family other than my significant others and like 2 of my closest friends on the planet, like people who have actively saved my life, know about this. And I had told my uncle about it years ago, and that was the first thing he asked me when he called me was, "Hey, tell me what those aliens you saw up there look like." And so I told him, and I said, "Why?" And he said, "Well, I had this lump in my finger, that was kind of bothering me. So I got to messing with it and I cut it out. It was this little whitish disc that was about half the size of a penny. Tried cutting it, tried burning it, couldn't even do anything to it. It's like somebody trying to take a dull knife to a cow's eyeball or something. Couldn't even touch it. So I flushed it. I said, it came out of your finger, right? And he said, yeah. Somebody stuck something in my finger while I was asleep that was not there before, where I've never had a problem in my life. And I just want to know what the ones you saw look like so I can tell or not if they come back, if it's the same one still messing around here. Which, you know, that for me was like, holy crap. Maybe. This stuff was going on before I was born. Stuff's going on when I was a little kid, and now it's going on. Like, he told me, I said, have you ever seen anything like that ever? And he said the only time he'd ever seen anything that other than the Bigfoot stuff, the only thing he'd ever seen was when he came back from Vietnam. He worked on oil rigs out in the Gulf. And he told me that one time they were all out there pulling pipe, and this light just came up out of the Gulf, out of the water, hovered probably 300 feet away from the rig, had all kinds of crazy lights going around it, and then it just took off faster than they could imagine anything moving. He's like, I've seen tracers coming out of an M60 a whole bunch of times. This thing was way faster than that. Other than that, never seen anything. So it kind of like, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to get it on the record in case things go completely sideways down there. Who knows? Like, you know, you start hearing stories about Bigfoot and UFOs in the same place at the same time, and who knows what's going on? I don't know.
Well, I want to go back to the original incident with the aliens that were trying to get in the house, because that's a really interesting event, right? Because if these things were in fact extraterrestrials, let's say, their behavior seems odd to me, right? So have you had time to go back and reflect and say, okay, what the hell? Because I've had people tell me they've been abducted and these things will transport through walls. They will materialize through walls. They will pull people through walls like it's nothing. Yet these things were exhibiting animalistic and even human type behaviors of trying to get in. Have you had time to sort of rehash that in your brain and apply your scientific brain to it? And I know it's subjective, obviously, because you have no way of knowing A, what they were, and B, what they were doing. But have you had time to go back and look at that and say, this is what I think was going on during that incident?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot, and I've gone so far as to research, you know, all of the types of aliens that people describe seeing. I have never found any that looked like those. There's some that have they're reptilian looking. They did not look like these things looked. And so I have to assume that different races of aliens are kind of like us. They're at different levels of technological advancement. Some of them can probably go right through walls. They've probably got the tech to do that. It's not, you know, most matter is 99% space. It's not, when you feel this desk, you're not feeling a desk. You're feeling the electrons and the surface of those atoms resisting you pushing your hand through it. Well, if you can disrupt the weak nuclear force, you could pass right through anything you wanted to. If you've got that tech, we don't have that tech, but you know, we've stepped out of the dark ages basically 500 years ago, you know, and look what we've done in that amount of time. Give us another 10,000 years, we may be able to do all kinds of crazy stuff that, you know, someone once said, if something is scientifically advanced enough, the difference between it and magic is imperceptible. Like, you know, if I took this phone back 100 years, people would freaking lose their minds. Like, there's more computing power in this than we used to send people to the moon 30, 40 years ago. 50 years ago, I guess now. So really what I think, honestly, is they were coming to carry on whatever kind of thing they're doing with my family. You know, that these things tend to travel down familial lines for whatever reason. Genetic experimentation, or, you know, population study, or whatever they're doing. That's kind of what it seems like. And the fact that I have no conscious memory of any of the implants that are in me makes me think that, okay, well, if you think you're just walking in on some kids and they actually put up a fight, and the next time you come see them, you just knock everybody out. Call it a day, do what you're going to do, and then go on your way. Like, other than that, I don't have a more rational explanation for it. You know, like literally for up until probably 25 years, my brother and I, when we talked about it between ourselves, we just referred to it as the night the demons came, because we didn't have a frame of reference for it. You know, it wasn't until later we're like, you know, anything that's not from here is pretty much by definition an extraterrestrial. I didn't see their ship, but I've been all over that property and I didn't see a hole in the ground they crawled up out of either. So I have to assume they got there somehow. And it wasn't in a big diesel truck. So, because I didn't hear them leaving. You know,
Have you had any
I didn't hear them
follow-up
coming, and I didn't hear them leaving.
Have you had any follow-up conversations with your mom about the missing time she experienced when she was pregnant with you? Does she have any theories on, does she think she was abducted? Do you think she was abducted? Have you guys talked about that at all since she shared that with you?
Yeah, we talked about it. Because like I told you, I had told my ex-wife about this, and you know, she was understandably very skeptical, because if someone, like, I'm straight up myself, got to see it to believe it. Like I said, I thought Bigfoot was crap until my uncle showing me pictures of things that I can't say that's anything else other than Bigfoot. So when she called my brother right after and was like, all right, tell me what happened this time. And he told her a story that's exactly like mine. The next time we were at my parents', we were talking about it. And my mom said, I don't even remember that. I just remember that time they followed us and we lost that time. And so we were like, what do you think happened? This thing's following y'all. And then you have no memory for hours, and you basically disappeared off the face of the earth for that time when people are trying to find you and they can't find you, and you come to like 2 miles down the road from where you last remember being. What do you think happened during that time? And she's like, I don't even want to think about it. Now, what do I think happened? 100% think something happened. That they had to go somewhere. We were talking about a spot where there's, like, you know, you can cover all the area they could possibly be in with members of the immediate family, much less my cousin's family too, in 15 or 20 minutes. And they didn't find them, and yet they show back up right there, where everyone who went to look for them would have had to have passed them. They weren't off on a side road. They're literally on the road that goes to their house. So they went somewhere without their knowledge or memory. Like, that's all I can think. You know, I can't I can't come up with anything else more rational than that. Like I could say, well, maybe, did you drive into a time dilation spot and you just happen to pop out the other side and you don't remember it because there's physics in there that's different and you don't chemically encode memories right when you're in there? Okay. No, that's less likely than some aliens snatching you for a minute to check you out. Like, I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah,
My grandma used to say, the aliens must have brought you because you're way too smart to be from this family. Like, Grandma, you're not very funny. And she's like, I'm not trying to be funny. So apparently there's been some awareness that weird crap has gone on around for a long time. They just don't hardly ever talk about it. And most of them are gone now, like half of my mom's generation's gone now. So you can't even go back and ask them. But
yeah, that whole familial line thing has always interested me when it comes to the alien abductions, the implants, and just seeing craft and things like that. It's hard for me to wrap my brain around why that is, but there has to be some sort of connection that we'll probably never know. I guess at the end of this, before we close out, I guess the question for me is you are a scientist. You have a very scientific approach to just about everything in your life, not just your job, but just in general. How have you been able to rationalize that in your scientific brain? That first the Bigfoot thing, and now the alien thing, and the UFOs and the implants. How do you rationalize that in your brain to allow you just to move forward and get through your everyday life, knowing that these things are out there, but yet we haven't proven it with science yet? But how do you
Right.
rationalize that just for yourself on a daily basis?
I think what's always gotten me past that is not just the awareness that what we know in science is more or less an approximation of what we can repeatedly do in a laboratory setting over and over again, or what we can observe in nature freely over and over again. Like, just the other day, we're finding galaxies that formed 300 years after the Big Bang. How? We don't know. Clearly, there are some holes in our theories. And if you're dealing with particularly intelligent beings, some that are, clear, if they're traveling the stars, they're clearly more advanced than we are. It's like an ant trying to study the scientist who's studying it. The ant's not getting jack out of that. He's just going back and being like, this guy snatched me up and put me on a thing and did some things to me, and I don't even know what he was doing. And they're all like, yeah, whatever. You're crazy. It's like a fish getting caught out of a school of fish that gets thrown back by the fisherman who's catch and release. He's like, man, you would not believe what happened to me today. All the other fish think he's crazy. Like, we have throughout history repeated so many things. When the library at Alexandria burned down, we probably lost 10,000 years of human history. We don't know what we don't know. And what we do know is that half of what we know today is going to eventually be proven wrong. It might not be entirely wrong, but there's going to be tweaks that have to be done. Like Einstein's theory of relativity, it took him 30 years to get that right. It was a long time coming for the smartest guy anybody can remember being around to figure something out that he came up with himself. Now, when he got that right, every time we've tested it, it's come back true. But that's just relativity. What that says about our ability to travel amongst the stars and warp space, Einstein-Rosen bridge wormholes are totally a thing. Einstein himself came up with them. So for somebody to say that that can't be, because how can you travel the stars? You just don't understand physics very well, do you?
Very true, man. And that's what keeps me coming back is the questions, at the end of every interview,
Yeah.
I say often. I have more questions than answers, but it drives me on to continue to talk to more people and have other people come on and share their experiences. And I really appreciate you coming on, man, and sharing what's happened to you and your family. And I think it's very fascinating and very interesting stuff. And at the end of the day, I'll leave with more questions than answers, but I think it's important for you to share your experiences because other people are going to hear this and they're maybe going to come forward and share their experiences. And I think every time we gather that data and put that together, we all learn more collectively about what's going on to probably a lot more people than what comes forward and talks about it. So I really appreciate you coming on. I've had a blast talking to you.
Man, I appreciate you having me. It's a lot of people have said it's cathartic, really. You kind of walk around with it on you your whole life, and once you let it out there, it's not as hard to say the next time, I guess, is really how it goes. And you give all of us out here an opportunity to unburden ourselves of these things that we've walked around with. And I think that honestly helps tons of people who are out there who've experienced things like that and feel like they're alone until they come across something like your show. And that I feel like you do a great service to humanity. I appreciate the hell out of that.
Well, I definitely appreciate it, man.
They say you're